The Capitol Hill Show with Tim Constantine. Serving Washington, D.C. and all of America.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi there, it's Tim Constantine with you. We appreciate you being with us on this fine day. Everyone except Howard Dean, that is. Howard Dean thinks you are a nut job simply for tuning in. You're absolutely crazy. We'll talk more about Howard Dean and his accusations of nut job later in the show. Plenty to do today. And as a matter of fact, Senator Ted Cruz will join me later today. Senator Ted Cruz, I like Senator Cruz. You know, it's funny because there are those in the media that just absolutely vilify Ted Cruz. How dare he have these outrageous positions? I will tell you the one thing I like particularly about Ted Cruz. I happen to agree with him on a lot of the issues. I happen to agree with him on many of these right-wing nut job issues, as Howard Dean would say. No, I agree with Senator Ted Cruz on many things. However, what I like about him is he ran for office saying, this is what I believe, this is what I will do when I get to Washington. And then regardless of the fact that he is vilified by the media, regardless of the fact he is chastised by senior members of the United States Senate, he sticks to his guns. He is still pushing the agenda that he said he would push when he ran for office. What a novel concept. And yet he is criticized for it. Anyway, we will talk with Senator Ted Cruz later in the show. But before we get to any of that, let's talk about the winter storm that wasn't. I'm referring to it as the snow job. What? The snow job. You know, they said this was going to be an historic storm. My brother, I grew up in Maine. All right, we had snow when I was a kid with some regularity and for a great length of months, most years. There was the occasional year where you would have a green Christmas. Green really was a relative term in Maine in December, but there would be no snow, a couple of times when I was a kid on Christmas Day. But in general, you would have snow somewhere in November. It would last sometimes as late as May. It's cold, it's snowy, it's miserable, it's a tough place to be. So the idea that this is a huge story that the Northeast is going to be hit by a snowstorm. My brother sent me a text the other night, and he said, newsflash, it's snowing in New Hampshire and Maine. I posted that then on my Facebook page, and I had more people send the little LOL. Oh, but the sad part, the most pathetic part of this is, first they tell us for 2 days, this is going to be an historic storm. The entire city of New York will be shut down. Boston, lives will be ruined. People will be killed. It is the end of times. And then, of course, it turns out not to be true. I know the Weather Channel has to sell advertising when they can. I know they root for hurricanes and tornadoes and blizzards just so people will tune in. But is there a point where they balloon these things up, they blow these stories up that don't really exist, and in turn, we stop believing them? Is there a point? Because I'm already at that point. As they kept pushing this story for a couple of days, I just kept flipping the channel. But here's the really sad part, all right? This morning, the storm has passed, the storm is over. CNN is still pushing it. It's like they haven't realized, okay, I'm not sure who the editorial staff is covering the news at CNN, but they haven't realized the storm that wasn't is gone. So they had a reporter out there in the city of Boston saying, well, it was not as bad as people thought, but, and then a snowplow goes by, and the girl says, see, they're still out plowing the streets. Except you look, and behind her, the street is perfect pavement. There isn't snow, there isn't ice, there's nothing. And so then she realizes that after she has said it. She turns and she looks, and a couple of more cars go blowing by with no trouble whatsoever, and she says, well, normally, this particular street would be very crowded, but because of these conditions, a lot of people are not. And she was struggling to try to justify her own purpose for being there. And I thought, surely something is going on in the world right now that is more important than the fact it snowed in Boston. Ugh. And then here's the irony, is at the same time that CNN and NBC and Fox and everyone else were pushing the story all week, historic snowstorm, blizzard conditions going to blanket the entire East Coast. Barack Obama was in India trying to establish rules for a climate change agreement. He's pushing the climate change agenda. Now, it was just about a year ago now that Ed Markey, senator from up in Massachusetts, said, you know, with all this global warming, pretty soon we'll have winters like the Carolinas. There'll be no more skiing. Well, Ed Markey, I will tell you what, Senator, head to New England right now because the skiing is great. If you are worried about global warming and about the lack of snow, I would pounce on that. Leave behind your Senate votes for the rest of the week. Go north. Spend the time with your family. Spend the time with your friends. Find some ski bunnies. I don't care what you do. Just go enjoy yourself because soon the winters will be just like the Carolinas. Now, I mentioned that I grew up in Maine. You guys know that I also, of course, have lived my entire adult life in Florida. I don't like the snow. I don't like the cold. And so when I leave the studio here in Washington and I go out into that cold at night, I grumble and mumble. And I say, oh, I can't wait till this weekend. I go back to Florida, of course, for the weekend. Can't wait for this weekend. Oh. The global warming that they have promised has not occurred. I am waiting for the global warming because in Florida, my home is 8 miles inland. But as you know, Florida is a very flat state. And if this glacial melt that they have promised, actually the reverse has happened. There is more ice at the polar caps now than there has ever been in recorded history. But they keep promising us a glacial melt. And if that occurs, I am thinking that slowly the beaches are going to edge inward until they get just about 8 miles inland in Florida, which means I, in my retirement years, don't have to move, and yet I will own beachfront property.
The Capitol Hill Show.
I mentioned Barack Obama is in India, and then actually he left India and he went to Saudi Arabia after the horrific incident in Paris, France, a couple of weeks back. No one of any meaning went from the United States to the memorial, to the big march in Paris. Or people from all over were there, except the United States. Our ambassador went. But she's actually just a fundraiser for Barack Obama, who then got an ambassadorship. I have got to get one of those gigs. I have got to remember to raise money for whomever the winning Republican candidate is next time so I can be ambassador to Ireland. Or here's better yet, be ambassador to Mauritius. Does anybody know where Mauritius is? A little island down in the Indian Ocean. It's about 500,000 people live in the entire nation. They have one murder like every 5 years. There is no military there. It is a plum gig. That's what I need. I need to be the ambassador to Mauritius. But they've gone to Saudi Arabia now. The president and his wife have gone to Saudi Arabia because the king of Saudi Arabia, at age 90, passed away this past week. And so they don't actually have a funeral the same way we do here, but they had a memorial-type event. And so the president and Mrs. Obama went to this thing, except here's the problem. Here's the trouble is Mrs. Obama shows up, and they're greeted by all the royalty in Saudi Arabia. And as you know, in Saudi Arabia, it's Muslim. It is very strict rules for the ladies. They must be covered up and so on. You have seen pictures of Hillary Clinton and others, if they happen to be there, wearing a head wrap. Now, they won't be in the tight burqa, the eyes-only burqa, but you will see them being deferential to the local customs, the local rules, the local law, and wearing their headdress. Well, Michelle Obama was above all that. I'm very careful. As you know, I'm very careful not to criticize the First Lady. I think you're not elected to that position. You're there with your husband. And yet, in this instance, Michelle Obama made the choice, going to try to give condolences to King Abdullah's family, to the royal family, for his death. Normally, women wear black, and they cover their head. That's the law. That's the dress code there. But this is not like a dress code at work where one day your luggage didn't come in, and so you wear something else. No, this is the law of the land. Most women in Saudi Arabia cover their hair and their face with a veil. Now, in some instances, like I mentioned Hillary Clinton or others, they'll just cover their hair. Obviously, their face is open because they're talking and communicating. But the women do not touch the men. That is a huge faux pas. There is no physical contact whatsoever. Well, either Michelle Obama didn't know this, which I find absolutely impossible to believe. And there is no way the First Lady of the United States was not informed what the proper rule of law, what the proper etiquette was in Saudi Arabia. And yet she steps off Air Force One, and she's got on long pants and a long, very bright, cheery colored jacket and no headscarf. None whatsoever. And so then there's a delegation there. And there are, of the Saudi officials, there's probably, 30 guys. And they're all there. And they greet the Obamas. And here's the part is she's walking through the line, and she reaches out to shake hands with each of them. Now, many of them just nodded to her and left her hand hanging there because you're not supposed to touch women. Women are not supposed to touch you. If you want to go with a strict interpretation, in some parts of the world over there, a woman touching a man, even in a handshake, would be considered adultery. And in some parts of the world over there, that woman would be stoned to death. Now, I'm not suggesting that they would actually try to convict Michelle Obama of adultery or that they will try to stone her. However, I am saying that's how serious they take this. This is a big deal. And so she keeps shaking. And a few of the guys actually shook hands. Most of them just nodded to her and refused to take her hand. But some went ahead and shook her hand. And so I'm just thinking, who else can the Obamas offend? Who else can we? So far, all around the globe, I am hard-pressed to think of anyone that thinks we are better off. And I contrast this with in 2008, Barack Obama was elected. January of 2009, Barack Obama is sworn in to office. And I used to travel extensively all over the globe. I would travel in the Middle East. I would travel in Africa. I would travel primarily West Africa, but also South Africa. I would travel in Asia. And at the time that he was swept into office, and there was great excitement and great optimism in the United States, that same excitement, I can't stress this enough, people all over the globe were excited about Barack Obama. Never in my lifetime have such high expectations been placed on day one on a president of the United States. Now, he's the one that courted that. I'm not in any way suggesting there's anything wrong with that. He went out and he made comments and he made statements, and George W. Bush had not been the most popular man on the globe, so the change was something. You might remember Barack Obama got a Nobel Prize, a Peace Prize. Why? Because he wasn't George Bush. He'd only been in office a matter of months, and he gets this prize, and the qualifications were he was not George W. Bush. But Barack Obama has been a gross, miserable failure. When I would travel around Africa, there were actually banners up in some countries. I remember in Ghana, there were banners hanging in Accra, the capital. There were banners hanging that showed their top dog and our top dog. They had Barack Obama was up on banners in the streets of Ghana. He was loved all over the world. Never have I seen anyone plummet so far so fast, because Barack Obama has managed to offend virtually everyone on planet Earth. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she managed to offend everyone. Remember the old reset button she did with Russia? How'd that work out? I'm trying not to use that phrase because it's very hip right now. How's that working for you? I don't like that phrase. But Hillary Clinton will point, if she chooses to run for president, she will point to her time as Secretary of State. Look, I traveled the globe more than anyone else. Yes, you did. But who is our friend now? Who is happy with us under this Obama administration and the work of then Secretary